Hi, happy hump day. This is Christopher McFarland, host of Fast Politics. Tonight we're enjoying a rare Wednesday evening where I am operating solo, flying solo, spread my wings for the very first time for all of you viewers at home. So thank you for enjoying me. Thank you for inviting me into your home, and thanks for being a part of our journey these past couple of months. Once again, I will remind you, as always, to like us on Facebook and please follow us on Twitter at fast_politics. Now, typically we start off the show with, common ground, issues that we find mutually agreeable on the other side of the aisle. And then we go into the fast sheet and we'll talk about some major issues. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about the genesis of this episode, which I'm titling A Religious Experience. At the outset, I just want to say this show was produced in West Hollywood, ostensibly one of the sort of gay meccas of America. I don't know that that's actually true, but I know that according to the last census, we're roughly 38% gay. So the LGBT community has stood with Orlando. We've had many vigils, prayer vigils, candle vigils, conversations, dialogue, discussion, how to support, how to be encouraging to Orlando, and also how to address the issue at hand. Common sense, gun legislation reform. Those conversations, those feelings of support, and that sense of political activism is strong here in West Hollywood. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge it and celebrate it, because I am a part of that movement too. Orlando, we're with you. Now, in light of those events, which have almost completely shaped tonight's episode, I want to harken back to an experience I think we can all relate to. Usually it's sophomore year, you're in chemistry class, and your chemistry teacher is telling you about how different chemicals interact with each other, and you're tasked with building this giant volcano. Different chemical ingredients get added together, you build the volcano, and then a certain combination happens, and then it erupts, spewing volcanic ash ostensibly over the planet. That's what I feel like is happening right now. Not just in America, but in the world at large. There's a lot of different chemical ingredients. It's the hate-filled rhetoric coming from some of the religious right, like Pat Robertson, who we'll hear from later. It's the Westboro Baptist minister. It's some of the political rhetoric coming from one of the presidential frontrunners. It's so many things that are adding up to a storm, a repressive storm, a sexually repressive storm, a political storm, a religious storm. It's all circling together. And I'm just seeing this giant volcano of evil, this just big giant volcano of evil. Reminds me of high school. And at the top of this giant volcano of evil, there's this like bright orange, I don't know what to call it, sphincter, just right at the top of this giant awful volcano of evil. And that's the mental image that I'm operating with tonight. And I'm sorry if I've violated your sensibilities tonight as I draw that picture in your mind, but that is the picture that I'm seeing. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I don't know what it means, but those are the images that I'm operating under as I crafted tonight's show. So I also want to say thank you to the team. We have an extraordinary team behind this show. We have quite a few people in the room supporting us, and I always want to acknowledge them. This show can't happen without the village that makes it work. So jumping into the fast sheet, common ground rather, I want to just thank the GOP senators who stood with Democrats on Monday in support of common sense gun legislation reform. There were 4 measures put forth, all of them failed, but there were 2 or 3 Republican senators who stood with Democrats, and I just want to say thank you. It's a demonstration that not all Republicans are completely owned by the NRA. It's also, in the reverse, a demonstration that not all Democrats are perfect, because there were a couple of Democrats who opposed it as well. I think we are making progress, and tonight's sit-in that's happening in Congress is about this very thing. That bill that didn't get through the Senate, if it had passed, would then be passed at Congress. Well, because it didn't get through, the House of Representatives is not going to get a chance to vote on anything, and that's why they're having a sit-in tonight, because they want their voices heard. They want to represent the people, because we know that 92% of the American population is in favor of common sense gun legislation reform, especially expanding background checks. So there should be no resistance for these representatives to put forth legislation, except for one very powerful lobby group that is controlling their decision making. So that's our common ground tonight. I'm going to shift right into the fact sheet tonight. These are things that I think that you need to know about what's going on. And I recognize tonight that I don't have an opposing voice, so hopefully we will move through these fluidly, and I will acknowledge that there may be a slightly more left-leaning tilt to my interpretation of events. So first up, Don the Con fired his campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. Why is this interesting? Well, Corey Lewandowski, just a couple of months ago, should have probably at least been suspended when it was suspected that that he had physically assaulted a woman. There was video, there was a lot of mounting evidence. It turns out he didn't. But during that time, Don absolutely stood by him. So you have possible assault on a woman, and then you have what happened recently, and that was his number sliding. So assaulting a woman, losing. Assaulting a woman, losing. Losing one. That's when Don the Con decided to actually fire Corey Lewandowski. And that's why this is politically significant. As a touchstone, as an inflection point in the decision-making skills and process of the Donald Trump campaign. Number two, Don is slipping in the polls. That's part of the reason why Corey was fired. This is interesting too because he didn't slip in the polls when he issued hateful rhetoric towards Latinos, right? When he first launched his campaign just a year ago, sliding down that escalator with that Eastern European woman behind him, he started saying hateful things about Mexicans. That actually only helped him. And in fact, what we've seen from polls is the more hateful rhetoric he issues against minorities, typically he enjoys a little bit of a spike, especially from white males. So that wasn't the issue. That didn't hurt him. Recently, he made some horrible statements about President Obama, Freudian slip, about President Barack Obama, saying that Barack Obama was in with ISIS, trying to orchestrate the incident in Orlando. He was insinuating it. That didn't hurt him in the polls either. Here's the thing that hurt him in the polls. When he started arguing with the idea that a Latino judge could preside over him, presumably Donald only feels that another white man can preside over him. But when he started pushing back against the judicial branch, that's when members of the Republican caucus felt that he had gone too far. And that's when we started seeing numbers slide, and the Stop Trump or Dump Trump movement really started gaining traction a couple of days ago as a result of this as well. All these things coalescing together. We're now hearing reports that it's not just 15 or 16 delegates that are opposing Donald Trump. It's actually in the hundreds. Hundreds of delegates who are looking to become unbound for the Republican National Convention, which is coming up in just a few weeks. So that's important and significant to keep in mind. Next up on the fact sheet, and the reason, by the way, for his opposition to that judge is because he's presiding over the Trump University scandal, where Don the Con basically defrauded thousands of kids who were just trying to get an education, and in fact specifically instructed his team members to target the most vulnerable. So I think that Don should be afraid of that judge's ruling, but to be honest, I don't think it's going to matter whether that judge is white, Latino, black, Asian, male, female. I think Don's going to have a serious problem coming soon. Next up on the fact sheet, Don only raised $1 million last month. By contrast, Hillary Clinton has over $46 million in the bank. Also by contrast, in 8 swing states, Hillary Clinton has launched a multimedia campaign buy. Don the Con, nada. So this is interesting, right? It's interesting that he doesn't appear to be doing anything, but it's also starting to feel very familiar. It's feeling very familiar because we've had other presidential candidates, specifically on the GOP side. It doesn't work so well on the Democrat side, but on the GOP side, there's often a presidential candidate or two who really don't want to be president, but they do want to make money through merchandising. They do want to hawk their books and their snake oil and whatever else they have in their back pocket. And it's starting to strangely feel as though Donald is modeling that behavior instead of an actual bid for president. I'm not full on saying he's not running for president. I have said on previous shows that I think he's working for Hillary Clinton. I actually no longer think that's true. I did speculate, and I thought for a minute maybe that was possible. But I think if he was really working with Hillary and just wanted to make a campaign that just failed against her, he wouldn't make so many blunders and make so many hateful things that are actually dividing the nation. Donald has become an active voice of division in America in just less than 12 months. A voice of division that's so powerful, so strong, it's being heard around the world. Okay, final point on the fact sheet. The GOP, with the exception of 3 senators voted unanimously against background checks for gun reform, and a couple of senators as well. But I want to talk about the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan has acknowledged that Donald has made racist statements, but he won't actually call Donald Trump a racist. He says that he's still fully supporting him, even though he makes racist statements. And this is a line of distinction. This is a line in the stand that I cannot stomach. If someone makes racist statements, they are a racist. I don't care if they're saying it for their reality show, pretending to be a presidential bid for the election. If you say racist statements, you're a racist. And furthermore, Paul Ryan, if you're listening, I'm sure you are, if you don't object, if you don't acknowledge what it is, if you don't call the person a racist, you are tacit, you are complicit, and you support that behavior. I'm not down with that, and neither is America. All right. Now, let's get to that volcano I was talking about. There are a lot of chemical ingredients. They're religious, they're neurochemical, they're political. There's a lot of factors. But for this first one, I want to talk about, and first give a disclaimer, I am a Christian. I go to church. I love Jesus. Love me some Jesus. But this next clip was really interesting. A retired bishop came out a few weeks ago and issued a very powerful statement on an interview, and I think it actually bears some relevance. Take a look.
I don't think hell exists. I happen to believe in life after death, but I don't think it's got a thing to do with reward and punishment. Religion is always in the control business, and that's something people don't really understand. It's in the guilt-producing control business. And if you have heaven as a place where you're rewarded for your goodness and hell as a place where you're punished for your evil, then you sort of have control of the population. And so they create this fiery place, which has quite literally scared the hell out of a lot of people throughout Christian history. And it's part of a control tactic.
But wait a minute, you're saying that hell, the idea of a place under the earth or somewhere where you're tormented for an eternity, is actually an invention of the church?
I think the church fired its furnaces hotter than anybody else. But I think there's a sense in most religious life of reward and punishment in some form. The church doesn't like for people to grow up because you can't control grown-ups. That's why we talk about being born again. When you're born again, you're still a child. The people don't need to be born again. They need to grow up. They need to accept their responsibility for themselves and the world.
What do you make of the theology, which is quite prominent these days in America?
I'm going to stop it there. So what's interesting about that to me is, again, I'm a Christian, but I can't argue with the fact that while religion has been very beneficial for humans for millennia in dealing with our feelings about mortality and processing grief, it's also been especially valuable for those with power and money. And I see that as one of the chemical ingredients in the situation with Orlando, because religion, Christianity, Islam, these great religions of the world, their desire is to be in our bedrooms. Their desire is to be in our bathrooms. Their desire is to control. And I think when you have a bishop like this, a highly placed sort of religious official talking about how the actual sort of lighting the fire under us, so to speak, is all sort of a man-made creation, it has to kind of make you stop and go, maybe you don't necessarily believe him. Maybe you don't necessarily espouse that. But can we at least acknowledge that manipulative dynamic is definitely real, it's definitely present, and it's definitely being exercised. All right. So this is just a little religion is regarded by the common people as true, by the wise as false, and by the rulers as useful. I just thought that was a good statement, sort of summing up that interpretation. The next little chemical ingredient I want to shift to is talking about how religion is essentially the opiate of the masses. I grew up in a charismatic church. I've talked about that on the show. I loved my church. It had amazing music. We raised hands. We were praying for people. We were healing people. It was crazy exciting. It was also very dramatic. And it was extraordinarily addictive. That kind of emotional sort of experience, you crave that after a while. And if you don't have that, you go into deficit and you want to recreate it. So when I was younger and I saw this kind of thing, I thought that was a cruel thing to say, that religion is the opiate of the masses. But I'm starting to think that, in a way, religion, at least in its modern day incarnations, used to control, used to manipulate, used to stoke fear. And by the way, that fear cycle, that can become an addictive psychological pattern as well that we then crave over and over as well. I really am starting to see that as an opiate. And what's the solution? Is the solution not to go to churches? Am I advocating for everyone to become atheists? No. I think everyone's got to, follow your conscience. I think you've got to follow where, if you believe in a greater power, you've got to follow that. What I'm saying, though, is religion, so not personal faith. I'm distinguishing the two. Religion as an institution is what we all have to be increasingly skeptical about and question as we move forward in society. Okay, next slide. I've already made the parallels between Christianity and Islam, but look, it's clear to me. I mean, we're often in America talking about how the Islam faith is doing terrible things to women. I mean, I've seen lots of women in America, though, that wear things like this on their head too. I think they're called nuns. So I'm not so sure that we in America haven't subjugated women just as much as they have in Islam-rich countries. But they've definitely done worse things, and the freedoms that women are now experiencing in America are definitely unparalleled. However, I just want to draw that parallel between religious persecution, religious authority, religious theology, and theocracy, and the danger that we're seeing it unfold and how it unfolds in the Middle East. When we hear about the religious right in America, they basically want the same thing here. They want a religious theocracy in America. And I got to tell you, folks, that is no bueno. That is not a good idea. Okay. Next slide here. I want to talk about something happy, the mental benefits of meditation. The good folks over at Harvard did some research with Massachusetts General Hospital over an 8-week period. They had everyone do 27 minutes of meditative exercise every day, and they discovered this is somewhat unbelievable, and if they didn't have the MRI results to prove it, I think this would be much more questionable, but it actually increased gray matter. That's right, brains actually grew. And specifically, it increased mindfulness in the participants, compassion, self-awareness, and these are all in centers of the brain known as the hippocampus. It also, in patients who had a reduction in anxiety, lost gray matter in their amygdala, which is the center of the brain responsible for stress reduction and control. So I just wanted you to see what kind of a healthy brain looks like and what it feels like, because what I'm about to show you now, next. And listen, you may have to ask Nana to leave the room, check on the rice pudding in the kitchen, because this is going to be a shocking physiological display of an MRI of a human brain that has been exposed to something terrible, something god-awful. Pat Robertson. This is what the human brain looks like under an MRI scan, having been exposed to Pat Robertson. Oh my God! Oh my God! It's on fire! Listen, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the people. I didn't realize, honestly, seeing this biological exam of folks who have been watching Pat Robertson has actually promoted empathy in me. I didn't realize their brains were on fire. I had no idea they were actually catching fire. Obviously, I'm kidding here, but the point is that when we expose ourselves to fanaticism, fundamentalism of any kind, it also, in the same way on the reverse slide that promotes gray matter formation, we have also learned that exposure to those types of dynamics with Pat Robertson will actually shrink your gray matter. And to prove it, I am now going to do something, and I apologize for this in advance. I apologize, but I feel like this test is vital for you to understand. I am going to expose you to Pat Robertson for 27 seconds, and you are going to feel your brain shrink.
Or not, that's the way it is. So the left is having a dilemma of major proportions, and I think for those of us who disagree with some of their policies, the best thing to do is to sit on the sidelines and let them kill themselves.
Okay, I'm sorry that I had to do that to you. I apologize. And just so you know, the context, Pat Robertson really believes, this is crazy because I have to explain it, it's so off the wall. He thinks that Democrats and Muslims are so aligned with the gay community, we're all just working together to destroy the world. He sees this as an inter-party constituent fight. That's how he's processing Orlando. He doesn't know what to do other than just to advocate that we all kill each other. It's disturbing that I grew up having to read this guy's books. It's disturbing that I had to watch this guy's TV show. He's a televangelist. He reaches millions of people. It's especially disturbing that he is a former GOP presidential nominee. This guy was a candidate. I'm sorry, candidate, not nominee. He was a candidate. But as a result of that candidacy, he led millions of people and still leads millions of people in the pursuit of this type of thinking, this type of ideology, this type of divisive ideology that tears America apart, opens the door for conflict, and an incredible opportunity for Islamic terrorists. All right, let's move on. Let's move on from Pat Robertson. Again, I apologize. One thing that I just wanted to mention, gay youth growing up in regressive, repressive environments like this, they kill themselves at a rate 8 times greater than their heterosexual peers. And I just want you to think about that now, juxtaposing it with what you just saw with Pat Robertson, because it's no mystery why, right? And the kids who kill themselves are the ones who really want to please their pastors, the kids who really want to please their parents. They really want to please their friends. They really want to be this thing that they're told doesn't exist. Gay doesn't exist except by perversion, unless you're an abomination. And if you are an abomination, and that is the word that is used, it's no surprise that these kids off themselves. And I think that's heinous, it's reprehensible, and it should be stopped. I'm not sure that it's covered under free speech either. I think we should be prosecuting some of these pastors. Okay, but I don't want you to think that all Christians are backwards. There's a pastor named John Pavlovitz, and he started a project called the Good Men Project. I was going to read a little bit of his letter. Please look him up online. He's done some extraordinary work in advocating for community and bringing community together. I think his words are powerful. I think his mission is important. The next thing I want to talk about is a dog whistle. We all know what a dog whistle is, right? A dog whistle is something that you blow that only dogs can hear and nobody else. In politics and political science, we refer to a political dog whistle as something that only a specific constituency can hear because you've used certain words strung together in a certain order or in a coded delivery that communicates a message that only they understand and flies over the heads of all the rest of us. Donald Trump has been issuing dog whistles throughout the entire year of his campaign. It started from the opening day, out of the gates. Out of the gates, he was calling Mexican rapists. Out of the gates, he was letting us know he might be a racist. And then you add up all the things that happened over the year. And we don't have a show long enough for me to summarize all those things. But from not knowing who the leader of the white supremacist movement was, to knowing that he had delegates who were actually racist, to all of the list is so incredibly long. To some of the hashtags he's absorbed that we've now learned are actually summaries of Nazi propaganda. It is very clear the campaign that Donald Trump is running. He is a racist. He is a racist. Mr. Ryan, he is a racist. And that's not who I want to be my president. That's not who's going to be president. But it helps you understand when we think about all the chemical ingredients that went into play here, right? In Orlando, this guy right here. I know that we just want to call him a terrorist and let that be that. But my conscience requires that I break this down a little bit. This guy was married, sure. He was married to a woman, but he was also on Grindr. Grindr is a social app for gay men. He was on Grindr a lot. People recognized him. There are people coming out now that say that they were involved with him. That nightclub, Pulse nightclub, he'd been there many times before, maybe a dozen times before. So this guy grew up in a faith like mine that said it was not okay to be gay. So he tried to blend in. He married a woman. That creates an open window for an absence of all kinds of ingredients you need for mental health, right? So you've got those things playing. Now you've got a presidential candidate who has actually changed the climate, the political atmosphere, by making it okay to talk in racial epithets and open the door to a whole variety of other things that we've never been comfortable with and have always said was politically incorrect. He keeps saying he's politically incorrect. Well, he sure is. But being politically incorrect is not necessarily a good thing when it opens the door to all the dark demons of this country's history that we have tried so hard to move past. So, when we think about this dark, evil volcano and the bright orange sphincter on top of it, I can't help but wonder what will happen if Donald Trump is elected. And the good news is I don't have to, because he's not going to be. Because the next president of the United States is going to be Hillary Rodham Clinton, HRC. All the way, baby. You know, I have to end this on a lighter note because I know that was kind of heavy. I just wanted people to, and I'm always trying to promote empathy in our approach politically. You know, one of the things that Hillary was good at doing at some of her rallies was saying, listen, when you think about the country, when you think about the people that are following Donald Trump, it's largely white males, right? Well, they are the people that have experienced the least sort of socio-political momentum over the last few decades. They haven't lost ground necessarily, but they've seen women, they've seen minorities, they've seen all these other groups come up behind them to the same place that they are. They're frustrated. They feel like they've lost something. That's something Hillary Clinton has been very good about advocating empathy towards, and I think we all need to understand. But we also need to understand it in the wider context globally, politically, socio-politically, and religiously. And that's what we're trying to do on tonight's show, titled A Religious Experience. All right, so that's my show. I'm Christopher McFarland. Thanks for joining us. To ignore evil is to become accomplice to it, MLK. I just want to throw up the credits here on the screen real quick and thank our amazing crew, Matthew, Danny, Anthony, Marshall, Duncan. I love working with you guys. Thanks for a show. And as I always end it, if it's fast, and if it's politics, you know it's fast politics. I'm Christopher McFarland saying good night.